Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Investcorp, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's Global Conversation event. We are very happy to have His Excellency Khaldoon Khalifa Al Mubarak here with us today. He is the Managing Director and Group Chief Executive Officer of Mubadala Investment Company, which has a total of $232 billion of assets under management, making it one of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds. Mubadala has transformed Abu Dhabi's economy beyond the oil and gas sector, and it has played a vital role in acting as a pioneer in how sovereign wealth funds are acting globally as responsible investors. His Excellency Khaldoon has been with Mubadala right from its inception and has been responsible for leading the company's growth for almost 2 decades. Today, His Excellency Khaldoon is going to be talking to us about Mubadala's growth plans. He will be discussing this topic with Investcorp's Executive Chairman, His Excellency Mohammed Alardhi. His Excellency has been the Executive Chairman of Investcorp since 2015 and has been leading the firm's global growth strategy since then. Under his leadership, Investcorp has grown its business from $10 billion of assets under management to $25 billion of AUM, which is where we are today. Mohammed has also very recently been appointed as a chairman of the Muscat Stock Exchange, which is a very important and strategic appointment for Oman's financial sector. And we here at Investcorp want to take this opportunity to congratulate him for this appointment. Now, some of you might be asking yourselves, what exactly is the link between Mubadala and Investcorp? Well, the answer to that is Mubadala is Investcorp's single largest institutional shareholder, and they joined our shareholders base back in 2015 when Investcorp decided to launch its own ambitious growth plans. Your Excellency, thank you for being here with us today. We are excited to hear about Mubadala's future plans, and we're looking forward to finding out what the global investment trends will be over the next 5 to 10 years, and also on how you plan to continue to act as a responsible investor and continue to contribute to improving human conditions around the world. The stage is yours, Mohammed.
Thank you, Yasmin. By the way, we are at just over 35 billion. I think I heard you say 25 billion. Welcome, everyone. We are really happy that you're joining us today for this special session with His Excellency Khaldoon Khalifa Al Mubarak, Managing Director and Group Chief Executive Officer of Mubadala. Khaldoon is an exceptional corporate leader. He has demonstrated his leadership skills at the helm of one of the world's most reputable sovereign investors. Under Khaldoon, Mubadala took the UAE's investment vision to the global scene and managed to successfully invest in 6 continents. Most importantly, Mubadala keeps raising its size and wants to double in size over the next 10 years. Abu Khalifa, welcome to Investcorp's Global Conversation. And let's open up with a question about the UAE. It's the 50th anniversary of the founding of the nation in 1971. We have seen the incredible and unprecedented transformation in recent decades. We're all emerging from a global pandemic. How are you thinking about the next 50 years of the UAE, especially future economic opportunities? And can you tell us a little bit about Mubadala's role in realizing these plans?
Well, first of all, thank you, Ahmed. It's a real pleasure and honor to be with all of you here today and to join Investcorp and yourself, Ahmed, in this conversation. It's really a pleasure and an honor. Big question. I think you're starting with a very wide question, but I think relevant given the subject matter of Mubadala and the future growth story of Mubadala. You have to look at Mubadala always in the context of the UAE and the story of the UAE. And I think it's probably a very good time now to look at the UAE as we approach our 50-year anniversary, looking at the 50 years that passed, looking at that. I think there's some very important point that we've all gone through, which was last year, 2020, COVID, obviously, the big elephant in the room, and then the next 50 years. And I believe it's, the 2020 was a very important year for us as a country as we look at the future, a very important transition year from the previous 50 years to the future. And I think a good way to look at where the UAE is today is, I think, how we've performed as a country, as a nation, in terms of fighting this pandemic, in terms of dealing with all the challenges, in terms of rising from that pandemic. So 2020, I think, Abu Ahmed, has been a year that I would, obviously subjectively, but I feel very strongly about it, give a high rating to the UAE in terms of the overall performance, in terms of the management of COVID. And I think it's a good reflection of the maturity of the nation, of our systems, of our economy, of our public health sector, all these sectors that have been challenged incredibly because of COVID. And you can really, in such a challenge, really get a good view in terms of how you rate where you've gone and what point you've gotten to. So if you look at it, one by one, I think just looking at maybe 5 important achievements that the UAE has accomplished in 2020, that sets that benchmark for the previous 50 years. I think number one, in terms of prioritizing the people of the UAE, every national and resident of this country who have lived and seen how this nation has managed through COVID, giving the utmost importance to the people of this country from the beginning of it. I think the testing capacity, UAE from probably the early stages of the pandemic was always in that top echelon, either in first or second place in terms of per capita testing. So we figured out, I think, very early on in this pandemic, that testing was going to be an important component of dealing with this challenge. And accordingly, building up that capacity, building up through manufacturing and having these supplies in hand and not depending on the challenges of the supply chain, I think just shows the ability of the UAE to quickly pivot, quickly recognize a problem, and then quickly solve the problem with an economic solution that gives it a sustainable ability to conduct what we have then subsequently conducted, which is a high per capita ratio of testing continuously throughout this crisis. And that was only done by moving early, building capacity, and then executing on that with a public health strategy and execution of that. That then moved into our vaccination drive, the identification of vaccines as an important part of the long-term solution with COVID, moving quickly again as a nation to partner with some of the best manufacturers around the world, being a country that administered phase 3 clinical testing at a high scale, over 40,000 volunteers, and then accordingly start the vaccination drive early, probably one of the earliest implementers of a vaccination drive anywhere around the world, doing so in 2 stages, from an emergency stage onto the stage it's at right now, and doing so in a way where we have been able, I think as a country, and the data speaks for itself, to have one of the lowest mortality rates in the world per capita, one of the highest vaccinated populations in the world per capita. And at the same time, importantly, I think as we look at the economics, the health side, looking at the economic side, the way the economy was able to manage 2020 and deal with the hardest part of it in the Q2 of 2020, coming out slowly in Q3, and then really starting that launch in Q4, spilling over into Q1. So overall, I think that gives you an idea of how the UAE handled COVID during that very challenging phase. And that, I think, is a great end to the 50 years story, the ability of a nation to handle that in that way and have that systematic ability to manage a crisis. It shows that, the strength of the leadership, the strength of the government, and the strength of the systems in place. All that was being done while, I would say, three things that were all from a history perspective, massive historic moments for the nation. So number one, our mission to Mars, a very important space program that the UAE embarked on, with a critical phase of it happening to be in 2020. That program was not compromised by COVID and the challenges of COVID. That program continued, and that program was successful. A massive, I think, move and victory for the UAE, and I think another testament to this nation's maturity and this nation's evolution. A second point is are the Arab world's first safe nuclear program. And again, 2020 was the year where our first nuclear reactor power generator was finished. It was finished and went into commercial operations just last week. But that critical phase of that first unit going into operations happened in the midst of COVID. And again, it was not compromised. It happened at the highest level of quality and execution, and the hands similar to the Mars program of very capable UAE engineers in partnership with some of the best around the world. So another very big testament to the UAE's ability to execute on such a complex program in any times, let alone during COVID. And then finally, I think we cannot forget a massive and very important agreement that was made, which is the Abrahamic Accords. And again, going through such an important historic point in negotiating such an accord, executing it is a big testament to the strength of UAE diplomacy. And again, the leadership comes out loud and clear here in its ability to rise in such an occasion, make a courageous step, and execute it and deliver on it. So really, you look at all what I've just described, that's the culmination of 50 years. And that's what gives, I think, me a lot of confidence as we look at the next 50 years about where the UAE is going. The UAE, I think, is in a very strong position when it looks at it the next 50 years, as it evolves as a nation, as it evolves as an economy, and as we evolve as people. And that story is another reflection of what we in Mubadala will try to go in parallel and follow that route that the UAE continues to go in. Sorry for the long answer.
No, thank you. That was really good. All these are amazing and major steps in any nation and countries. And obviously UAE has really done them with flying colors. So it's a brilliant thing. Let me ask you, Abu Khalifa, on the future of the business. So what are the lessons for the business from COVID and what we went through? And what are you going to be focusing on post-COVID?
So COVID, I think, taught us many, many lessons, all of us, in our different fields. And, Abu Ahmed, we've had many conversations, me and you, over this last 12 months about our experiences, and we've shared together some of the highs and, of course, the lows. I think the first one, which is very clear, and I think everyone can agree with me, is that speed of movement to the digital world. What was happening at a pace pre-COVID just suddenly took on 3, 4, 5, 6 different gears of speed in terms of that evolution towards the future on the digital side. And that's happened. So today, many of these businesses that were dependent on that change or betting or banking on that change obviously prospered and benefited, I think, greatly. And many of these sectors and businesses that were betting against it or hoping it was going to be slow, suddenly COVID, if anything, buried them. So that's one of the first clear, I would say, conclusions and learnings from COVID is this new world that we anticipated it was going to happen has happened, and happened a lot quicker than what most people anticipated. And accordingly, I think we all have to adjust. People that have not been prepared have to be now much better prepared, have to catch up. And that speed of catching up will determine really your success as a business or as a nation. One of the other learnings, I think, very clearly is our way of life. The way of life is also changing. Many of the things that we thought could never changed. Simple things, such as going to work. The simple act of going to work in your office is now changed. The way businesses and operations around the world deal with the physical presence versus the virtual, and that transition into virtual has changed the dynamic of a workforce. And I think that's a very important learning. For one, I have to be very honest with you. If you had asked me, maybe 14 months ago, that you would be able, can you transition into a virtual world where you would be doing more than 80% of your business virtually, I would struggle to, I would have definitely, in retrospect said, no, there's no way I can do that. There's no way I can do that. And there's no way my business can transition that quickly to doing something like that. But it's proven that you can, and your business is resilient, and people are very resilient and will learn very quickly to move. And I don't think there's any move back to the good old days. I think whatever the new norm is going to be post-COVID is going to be something of a hybrid between where we were in 2019 and where we are today. So, that's another, I would say, key learning from me. The third one is on the supply chain. I think very clearly we all learned, I think all our businesses have learned, and countries have seen that. The key, supply chain management before COVID was about, getting essentially the lowest cost of delivery to whatever it is that you are requiring. That did not include a very important component, which is the security of the supply. Obviously, depending on sector and depending on countries, it was there, but I think I'm talking in general terms. What COVID has shown is that, particularly in important aspects, such as materials for healthcare provision, food, agri, etc., you need to be able to manage that supply chain, and even in industries that require critical components, that if a disruption, such as a pandemic, happens, you were able to continue your operations without significant impact. That has changed the way folks look at supply chain management. And I think that change is real, and I think will change the way, and has changed the way companies plan, operate, and more importantly, in terms of in-country requirements, both not just from an economic perspective, but also, I would say, in many aspects from a national security perspective. That look and that lens has changed substantially because of COVID.
Khalifa, let me ask you about some of the trends beyond COVID. I mean, life sciences, pharmaceuticals are in the spotlight. As an investor, what are your views on these sectors?
So, Abu Ahmed, I would say if I take you back to 2018, we at Mubadala started to formulate strong views in terms of the next megatrends that we anticipate. And we looked at our portfolio, and we came to some conclusions based on convictions that we formulated in terms of how we see our portfolio and what we see the future of our portfolio given the convictions on the megatrends we were seeing. And we reached the conclusion that we looked at it in three ways. We see sectors that have headwinds within our portfolio, and that these sectors will be challenged, and therefore we need to start looking at a strategy to monetize and exit and reduce our exposure to these sectors. We also looked at sectors that we defined as sectors with tailwinds, sectors that we see growth, we see a very clear profitability story for us long-term. And accordingly, these are sectors we want to aggressively pursue and invest in. And we've defined that, and we need to increase our exposure to these areas. And three, we defined what we call stabilizers, which are sectors that are that give us that balance in these business cycles, gives us that steady yield, and allow that portfolio overall to keep a balance. So we have the headwind sectors, the tailwind sectors, the stabilizers in the middle, and a portfolio that we looked at in 2018 and clearly saw ourselves underweighted in one side, overweighted in the other, and we needed to start at that shift. On the areas with tailwinds, this is pre-COVID. This is you're looking at 2018, early 19. Very clearly, I think the mega trends in terms of that digital revolution that's happening, investment in technology, healthcare, medtech, agri-tech, all these areas, digital infrastructure, were defined as sectors that we certainly felt life sciences had a very interesting upside story. And we started to invest more substantially in that space. So we spent 19, I think, in that first phase of that transition. And we embarked on 2020, continuing on that strategy. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, Ahmed, we took a pause. And in March 2020, we took a pause at Mubadala. And we spent about 6 to 8 weeks trying to understand and really have a view on what we see will be the ramifications of this COVID as a whole, from a macro level, and then specifically on our portfolio. And then two, stress test our strategy, that new strategy that we embarked on starting 2018, to this new reality. And create basically a new set of convictions that would allow us then to go back and continue to do what we do, which is invest and generate returns to our shareholder. It was very clear to us by the end of our pause that whatever direction we were going on in 2018 and 19, if anything, was supercharged. And accordingly, we doubled down. Our convictions were further, I would say, cemented. And from about April, May, Mubadala went back to the same strategy, but with, let's say, more engine and fuel power. And we ended up in 2020 probably investing more than, not probably, we've invested more in 2020 than we've ever done in 1 year prior to that. We supercharged our monetizations when it comes to the sectors that in the headwinds, and we kept investing in the sectors in the tailwinds, building new partnerships, and really focusing on life sciences as an example, technology, mobility, digital infrastructure. These were all areas that we invested, I would say, quite substantially in 2020, and it's paid off, I think, well. And I think, reaffirmed that our strategy was on the right track.
Brilliant. Clean energy, Khalifa, is another active area for Mubadala. And can you tell us about your work there and what the future holds?
So clean energy, Ahmed, is an area that we've been investing in for many years. You know very well, and I think probably many of the guests on this call will know that Masdar is a Mubadala company, a company we established many years ago. When we, I would say, took a view in terms of a mega trend that renewables and that energy transition is happening. And accordingly, we started investing, I would say, very early on in both solar and wind, particularly, to be more specific. And over the last 10 years, we've built a portfolio that is quite substantial. We're one of the largest investors in the world in both solar generation and wind generation in many different places, both east and west. That strategy was certainly, I would say, probably around 4 or 5 years ago, is when that pre-investment period where solar was being, we were generating solar at 30-40 cents a kilowatt, and then suddenly, over a very, very fast period of time, we were able to take it from 30 cents to 20 cents to 10 cents to 5 cents to 2 cents to now almost 1 cent per kilowatt. And there, the commercialization of solar, to be more specific, was unbelievable. And that's a space that we know very well. We've invested in it very well. We are one of the largest per capita solar generators of power in the world here in the UAE. And we know that business very, very well, and we know the future in that space. I think the trajectory in that space is very clear. And that continuous commercialization and growth of renewables as a percentage of power generation in any country's portfolio is very clear. So that, I want to emphasize is a space that we've been believers in for a long time. And same thing with wind. Wind is another technology that its cost per kilowatt generation has dramatically dropped over the years. And we've been part of that journey. And we've been investing heavily in that space. In the UK, as an example, we're one of the largest investors of wind generation among many other countries where we've done the same.
Khalifa, on clean energy and renewable energy, there are people who say, the biggest opportunity is going to come from countries that really have no other option, like China. And that maybe those who have been, spoiled with a lot of oil and gas is going to take them a lot more to do this transition. How do you look at that in terms of investment opportunities? And
I think, Mohammed, it boils down to competitivity and cost of power generation, and that ultimately both industrial and commercial and retail cost to the consumer. So at the end of the day, if it's cost effective and attractive, which it is, it will grow. It will grow, and it will grow substantially, because one thing that is common wherever you are, is that you will always look for a lower cost of energy, and continuously. That's the story. And accordingly, renewables, I think, fits right in, because that is a source of energy that, through technology, continues to go down in cost, and accordingly becomes more and more attractive, and the demand, the replacement demand, keeps growing. So I'm a big believer in renewables. I'm a big believer in renewables everywhere. I don't think the UAE is one of the largest producers of oil and gas in the world, but it's also one of the largest generators of renewable energy in the world per capita, be it solar or even nuclear, as we spoke earlier. So it's not that you have the resource. I think there's going to be a transition, an energy transition, which is happening. I think the uses of natural resources are also, I'm not saying that natural resources, and particularly oil and gas, that game is over. No, it's far from over. And there will continuously be a market for it for a long time to come. But I'm saying that renewable energy is a very competitive source of power generation, and it will continue to grow. And we, as Mubadala, will continue to invest in that space with strong convictions in the future.
I want your views on infrastructure. Today, for instance, we have announced quite a sizable investment in the US infrastructure by acquiring one of the important companies, RoadSafe, a big provider of service to roadways, construction, railroads. How do you see the infrastructure playing in the world? There is sometimes people look at it and say it's playing a big role in even the competition with these big powers, China and the US. China have done a lot in the last few years in transforming its infrastructure. US is a huge opportunity, and you saw what President Biden has put lately and the focus it's done. What are your views, Khalifa, on this?
I think infrastructure is an important and if not critical component of growth. Competitivity in any country depends on its, among others, but infrastructure is a key part of that competitive story, be it on transportation, be it on telecommunications, all kinds of infrastructure is crucial, I think, for that competitive story of any country. So when you look at the future and when you look at that investment story, I think countries are seeing now better ways to, more efficient ways to build infrastructure and to build up infrastructure, particularly in countries where there's a dire need for either an upgrade or new infrastructure. And I think that opens the door for creative ways to allow the private sector and to allow investors to invest in that space and generate, I think, an acceptable rate of return. So infrastructure as an asset class, I think, I'm a big fan of, I'm a big believer of. And I think today, if you look at, you mentioned the example of the United States. The United States is a country that has incredible infrastructure requirements and is now, again, taking the opportunity of these stimulus packages combined with the zero interest rates to really stimulate a significant upgrade towards its infrastructure across the board. The US is an unbelievable market. Both of us, I think, have invested there all our careers and know that market very, very well and know how important of a market it is. And that asset class, particularly now, with the opportunities that that I know are going to come in the years to come, I think the US will be a very interesting place to invest in infrastructure. And I think for investors all over the world, they will look at this as an opportunity to have an allocation for sure towards that market and towards that asset class. But that story also exists in many places around the world. You're seeing it in Asia. And I think Europe is another continent that has tremendous requirements when it comes to infrastructure and upgrades. And I think also you will see a move there for more substantial infrastructure development across the board, again, in the different subclasses of infrastructure. And again, I reaffirm it's an asset class that in a portfolio, particularly of investment companies such as ours, yours, and the one I run, Ahmed, we have to have continuously an allocation towards infrastructure, and then obviously the risk-return profile of that asset class, I think, will fit always within our overall asset mix.
Thanks, Abu Khalifa. Let's. My last question is on ESG, and I'd like to hear what you. How does Mubadala think about ESG? Is global business taking the challenge in the right way?
So I'll answer the second one. Global business is definitely now woken up to ESG. Global business is definitely, you will struggle to meet an industry leader, both East and West, that doesn't have ESG on their radar and with a clear focus on it, or else they're not doing their job. This is just the reality. I think from a Mubadala perspective, we've been, I would like to say, living ESG from the beginning. We've been a responsible investor from the beginning. Ever since Mubadala started acting, because we have a shareholder in my case, which is the government of Abu Dhabi. That in itself drives a way of doing things and a mannerism in terms of the type of responsibility we take in any investment we take and in any sector we invest in, and whatever partner we partner with, and in whatever community we serve. So that responsibility, I would say, has been ingrained in the DNA of Mubadala for the last 20 years. ESG now has come to, I would say, as a representation right now of a new trend globally. But I think, and I believe that to my core, we as Mubadala have been living that de facto since our inception. Now, I think we have to present it maybe more clearly. We have to define it in a more public way. And that part, we can do for sure. And we will do more of. But as a movement, ESG is here and it's here to stay. And you're either going to jump on that train or that train is gone.
Excellent. It certainly is. We find everywhere you go now, ESG takes a lot of the time to be asked about and to be answered, for sure.
Absolutely, Mohammed. You know that. You have to have a clear strategy. You have to have I think quantifiable targets and quantifiable, performance KPIs towards ESG, and you need that for your investors. You need that for your shareholders. You need it to your partners. This is now, and I think that's a very good thing. That's really a very good thing, particularly when we have partners such as ourselves that have shared values. I think it's a natural transition for many folks.
Well, we have Khalifa found it this way. Exactly. First of all, like you said, it's a very welcome formalization of something we have been, living for a long time, and that's why, in Investcorp we put those established investment guidelines and excluded certain industries and businesses from consideration. But ESG is bigger than that, bigger than just excluding something and not looking at something. It's a responsibility, and it's a responsibility towards all our stakeholders, whether it's the investors, shareholders, our employees, and citizens of the world. And really, we took that responsibility is that as capital providers of sustainable business, it's got to be about enriching the lives of the future generations. And so we've done a lot of work on that. We've been talking to our stakeholders, talking to experts in the industry, and then we came up with 3 pillars. Of those, we thought that it has to be being a responsible operator, being a responsible employer, and being a responsible citizen. And under all these, we have KPIs and a roadmap to implementing this over the next 2 to 3 years. We also find that it shouldn't just stay to Investcorp, but actually goes down to our companies and our businesses, because that's how it can evolve. And it is a journey. This is not something that you can do overnight. So very much agree with your vision on this. Well, finally, is there anything, any other thoughts that on your mind, anything you want to say before we close?
I mean, Mohammed, well, all I can say is, as always, thank you for what you're doing. Mohammed is a dear friend before being a partner. I have the highest respect and trust in Mohammed. He's been a long-time friend, and I think his leadership of Investcorp and that transition that we've seen Investcorp go through to get to the 35 billion in AUMs, I think is because you have a fantastic team in Investcorp, but I think your leadership and your chairmanship has been unquestionably, I think, integral in that. So I commend you for that. I wish you again all the best with the public markets now in Oman and supporting the stock exchange in Oman. Public markets in this region now are going through, I think, a very important transition also, a positive one, I hope and I'm sure. And again, your role there and your stewardship, I'm sure is going to be a great asset to Oman. Thank you so much for for taking the time and giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. And I look forward to taking some questions now.
Well, Khalifa, thank you on this. I mean, I mustn't also miss to say thank you personally for to you and to all the team in Mubadala throughout this journey. In tough times and in good times. Our conversations and your counsel has been really amazing. This growth that you talked about from 10 billion to 35 billion has really been a fantastic journey, and the team has really made it work. And it really, concentrate on probably three things. Is really going deeper into our, major and core markets, the United States, Europe, and the GCC, but also as strongly into our new geographies, India, China, Southeast Asia. A global distribution system that, ensure that we can take the menu of all of our products and multi-products everywhere. And hardworking and incentivized team. So that's really what brought it in. So thank you very much for that. I want to. What about Emirates Global Aluminum? Is that something?
Emirates Global Aluminum is obviously a large industrial play that we've invested in as Mubadala for many years, in partnership with Dubal, and we established obviously Emirates Global Aluminum, which is one of the largest smelters and producers of aluminum in the world. It's been a very I would say successful story of building through the value chain of the mining side all the way down to the smelting and the refining, where we've invested a lot of capital in terms of refining capacity and smelting capacity in the UAE and mining capacity in Guinea, Conakry. This company is now a very mature business, a very well, I would say, placed business for growth. Its cost base is in the lowest quartile, and its product mix, including fantastic product that they started producing last quarter, which is solar aluminum produced from solar power, using solar power. I think are the type of innovation and products that have distinguished this business. So it's a great business. I'm very, as you can see, very proud of this company. And it's a company that I suppose what you're asking, because it's been in the media, that we're contemplating taking public. That contemplation is true, and it's not new. We've been thinking about this for a couple of years and waiting for the right time for that business to be IPO-able. And I think we're very close now. The decision, what we will decide, obviously when the appropriate market conditions are there, but the company certainly is in a very strong position and I think well placed for an IPO.
There were a couple of questions on GlobalFoundries. And is the IPO of that and of any timing of it?
So GlobalFoundries is another one of these businesses that we've taken a long-term mega trend view from the beginning. GlobalFoundries is obviously in the semiconductor manufacturing business. It has foundries in the United States, in Germany, Dresden, and in Singapore. It's a business that we've been investing in substantially for years, building the capacity and the capabilities in this business. And again, we took a view many years ago that semiconductors are going to be obviously in high demand, and the growth story for semiconductors was clear. And we took, I think, a macro view by investing in GlobalFoundries, investing in that business. It's not an easy business, it's a very competitive business with high capital requirements and a very high barrier to entry. Today, GlobalFoundries is a strong, well-run business. We own it 100%. We have not taken a view or a decision yet There's been reports out there that obviously you're referring to in terms of it being, again, another business that we're looking to IPO. I can tell you it's a business that is a very important business for us, and it represents an area of growth that we have very strong convictions in.
You mentioned the Abrahamic Accord. A few questions on investing in Israel. Do you have plans to invest in Israel? How much would you invest, and in which sectors?
So if you look at the sectors we like, I think overall, and particularly if you go within the tech space, the cyber space, the health tech, these are all areas that Israel has, I think, incredible companies, incredible entrepreneurs, and very, very interesting opportunities. So we are certainly looking into investing in those spaces. We are looking at partnering with some of the best players in that space, and it's an area that we are active in.
Questions about India. What are Mubadala's plans for investment in India? How can Investcorp support Mubadala in its objectives for India?
So I'm a big fan of India, Abu Ahmed. India is an incredible country, incredible nation, and certainly when you look at growth and when you look at the next 10 years, and when you look at anticipated GDP growth in India for the next 10, 20 years, I think you can formulate a clear view. It is a country that has a very attractive and exciting growth trajectory. It's a country we know very well. Historically, I mean, this is one of the largest trading partners of the UAE. We've been trading for generations and generations. So there's a rich history between us. They know us well. We know them well. But I think clearly, and I think this is something that I will say Mubadala, but I will also be presumptuous and say Investcorp, we're underweight in terms of India for many reasons. I think over the last many years, we've not invested as much as we should invest in India, given the size of that economy and the potential. That is changing. That is changing. As far as we're concerned, Mubadala, we're certainly giving it a very particular focus. And as an example, we've invested more in India in 2020 than the previous 19 years combined. So that gives you an indication of how serious we are about investing in India.
There's a question about how do you see the future of relations between the US and China, and how is that possibly impacting the global markets and investment opportunities?
Yeah, this is clearly a challenge. I think it's a challenge for any business. When the two largest economies in the world are having the sort of, let's say, disagreements that these two countries are having, it has a ripple effect everywhere. So its impact is something we feel everywhere and almost in every business we're involved in, one way or another, some high, some low. But the reality is, I think, for the world, a stable globe is always, stability is good for business. Open trade is good for business. And this move towards decoupling, I think, has quite substantial ramifications that are difficult at this stage to completely assess. The reality is for countries and for investment institutions like ourselves, we have to be able to follow the trends, invest in the right sectors, and invest in the right countries where there's growth. And I think, when you look at these two countries, the United States is the market we know best, that we've invested in quite actively from the beginning, and China is the second largest economy with quite a remarkable also economic trajectory story. So we have to, at the end of the day, and I'll answer you this in this way, we have to find a way to navigate in these challenging geopolitical winds. But at the end of the day, our interest is always towards stability and open trade, and hope that these two countries reach some sort of balancing point that allows them both to respect each other's issues versus the other, and more importantly to us, grow and allow the world to grow and coexist in a mutually beneficial way.
Khalifa, there are a couple of questions on future risks. If you were to look in the next 5 years, what would be the major risks that you think global businesses should worry about?
I think several things come to mind. Inflation. I think inflation is something that we have to all pay a very close attention to in the months and years ahead. That's one risk. Another risk is, and a real one, I think, is another pandemic. Being in one right now, we can't just think about getting out of it without actually, not learning from the experience of this pandemic and the reality of how easy such a thing can happen. So the risk of pandemics, I think, is now a real risk that maybe 2 years ago nobody would have mentioned it on their top 5 list. I think it has to come on your list of risks. I think an overall global correction or slowdown, while unlikely, I think in the short term, it is something that I think we all have to keep an eye on, particularly with the incredible amount of stimuluses that have been put and the arguably the valuations that you're seeing right now across pretty much all asset classes globally. So you're seeing a massive valuation increase, and that again tends to lead towards a correction to anticipate. And I think the risk you outlined, which is the geopolitical risks, I think these are risks that are real, and that US-China rift has real ramifications that one has to also pay attention to. These are the sort of risks that I would say and for us, we think a lot about, and obviously are a big part of our planning.
There were few questions about macro economics, the massive liquidity that there are in the capital markets now, the rising prices and valuations. As a global investor, how do you look at that and how do you navigate it?
I think the bottom line, because we take a long-term view, and I think that's an important one, and I believe you do the same, Mohammed. At that point, the cycle, these cyclicalities, while an important consideration, are not the main driver of our decision-making. The decision-making for us is more, and I go back, megatrends and convictions. What we see are the trends going forward. What are the sectors to these trends that we have convictions about? And accordingly, what are the investments within these sectors that we think are the winners? Now, valuations then become a point, obviously, of entry. But if you take that, I think, and take a long-term view the way we take, I would say this is how we think about investing. This is how we think about the future. This is how I think that risk on the downside is considered by us as a calculated risk. At the end of the day, if I'm investing in the right sector, in the right company, and in the right trend, then I think we can live with those the cyclicality, knowing that on the long term, which is how we ultimately will gauge our performance, we're on the right track and picking the winners.
Well, Khalifa, there's a question about the Middle East as an investment region and hub. How do you see the future of the Middle East in terms of business and investment opportunities?
Well, first thing I'll say is that the Middle East is not one. You cannot describe it in one consistent description. And within the Middle East, you have countries on the wide right, on the wide left, in the center. So it's a very diverse set of countries with very different stories fundamentally. So it's hard for me to answer this question in a macro sense. What I will answer is maybe specifically on the UAE front. I think the UAE is, very well positioned within the Middle East, but also more importantly, globally, as a competitive economy, an economy that has a positive growth trajectory. It's an open economy. It's an economy that has continuously over the last 50 years grown and evolved and has weathered all kinds of corrections and cycles, and has shown its resilience. And if you look at over the last 12 months, how this country is continuing to evolve and the speed of that movement, you see it in the rules, the regulations, the laws. Some quite substantial changes that you've seen in the UAE to meet again with its ambitions of being again a 21st century leading economy. So when you see that, and when you see the track record, that gives you, I think, a lot of confidence in the way you're seeing it from me, that this is, I think, a good place to invest, a good place to grow, and really, ultimately, a good place to live.
We have a lot of questions, Abu Khalifa, but we have run out of time. And so I want to really say a big thank you for being with us and sharing the inspiring Mubadala journey and what you do. Ramadan Mubarak to you and all the family. Is there anything else you want to say before we close?
Ramadan Mubarak, Ahmed, and to everybody joining us today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. And inshallah, we all meet again soon in person. And next time we do this, not virtually, but in person.
Inshallah. All the best. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.